Okay, I want you to just spend a couple of minutes with me and switch everything that you've been thinking on off for a minute. This is very important. I want to take you back to the world in 1948, okay? The ashes of World War II are still warm. The Cold War is already beginning to chill in the air, and the Soviet Union has a propaganda machine that is in full swing. Radio Moscow, Pravda, endless streams of anti-American stories are pouring into the homes of men and women all across the globe. And Congress looked at this and said, we need a counterbalance on this. America needs to tell her story to the world about liberty and about our founding ideals, and we need to tell it to the rest of the world. This is the birth of the Smith-Mundt Act, okay? We needed to launch things at that time like the Voice of America and Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. These were not just radio stations. For many who were behind the Iron Curtain, these were lifelines. A Polish dissident in the 1970s, or a Hungarian who lived through the 1956 uprising, they'll tell you they're huddled in the dark and they have that dial of that radio, and they can tune it, and they carefully tune it, listening to an American voice break through the static and break through the darkness and says, freedom is real, and the world hasn't forgotten you. They remember that as being very important. But, and here is the key, we as a society drew a very bright red line. None of this could ever be used in the United States. Congress rightfully was terrified of unleashing a government propaganda machine on its own citizens. Now, I want you to remember, 1948, Congress is still Democrat. Okay? You just had 20 years of the same president, FDR. They're about to say no president can serve that long. The Democrats said no Democrat president, no Republican president can ever serve that long because we were so close to fascism. So the Democrats are very concerned about the government going fascistic, and they should know about it because they remembered the Creel Commission. Now let me take you back to World War I. The Creel Commission is something that nobody remembers, and everyone should, because it's what whipped America up into a frenzy to get us to go into World War I. You know it because you remember the I Want You, Uncle Sam poster. And I've always hated that Uncle Sam poster because of the Creel Commission. I love it. I think it's really beautiful. It was created by an artist that he didn't create it for the Creel Commission. So, he was innocent. But it was the Creel machine that plastered it on every wall, every post office, every train station. And suddenly, Uncle Sam's finger was pointing at you. It wasn't just a poster. It was a summons. We need you to go to war. Americans did not want to go to World War I. In fact, Woodrow Wilson said, the other side, he's going to put you into war. I'm going to keep us out of war. He knew that wasn't true. Within 3 months after his reelection, we're at war. But he had to bring the country along. So the Creel Commission, through films and songs, films like The Kaiser, The Beast of Berlin, it turned Germany into a cartoon villain. George Cohan, he wrote songs over there. All of these things were done by the government as propaganda to get Americans to go over there and fight. Then the government went even further, and they started hiring these what were called 4-minute men. Now imagine this. You're sitting in a movie theater. The film, you're watching maybe the newsreel, and as they're changing the reels, some guy who's just in the audience stands up, walks to the front, clears his throat, and he delivers this really well thought out and rousing 4-minute speech about patriotism and liberty and crushing Germany. The government had 75,000 volunteers. They gave millions of speeches when anybody would pause in churches and schools, in parks, in theaters. They were called 4-minute men. This was social media before social media. They were short bursts, and they seemingly were everywhere and always on message because the message was crafted by the government. Then the Creel group through our government, published booklets, official bulletins. They planted stories in the press. This is when we really started getting into the press. And information had one goal, all of the information, and that was rally support for the war and drown out anybody that was disagreeing with that. Okay, the government actually encouraged kids to spy on their neighbors. That you were encouraged, and postmen did this, to go through the mail. If they saw letters that were coming in and they wanted to know who it was, and are you a German spy? Are you somebody who is going to be against the war? Postal workers went through your mail, and it was legal at the time. Operators were encouraged to listen to people's phone calls and to report if they were on the other side. This is Germany. In fact, because of the Creel Commission, Germans and what's his name, the head of the German propaganda, what's his name, the German douchebag, I can't remember his name. Anyway, what was his name?
Goebbels, you talking about?
Goebbels, yeah,
oh, okay.
Goebbels.
Although I like your name for him better,
yeah,
frankly.
Yeah, Goebbels, the douchebag. Anyway, he said, we lost World War I because of American propaganda, but we learned how Americans did it. And that's what Goebbels did in World War II. All of this propaganda, okay? By the way, American advertising up until World War II, it was called propaganda. What you heard, I wouldn't have said now a message from our advertiser. I was delivering literally, and it was cool at the time to call it propaganda, because that's what it was. Paid for propaganda. But after Goebbels took it and did what he did with it, we were like, oh, propaganda is bad. Okay? So here's what happened because of the Creel Commission. They were pushing uniformity of thought. They did that by making sure that Americans were hearing the same slogans, the same images, the same stories from every direction, which created the illusion of unanimous consent. I want you to think about life today. I want you to think about life during COVID. What was the goal of the government? To crush any dissent and to control all of the messages that were going out, to make sure that you were hearing the same slogans, the same images, the same stories from every direction, to give you the illusion that it was unanimous consent. What about global warming? It's exactly the same. Then on top of it, the Creel Commission demonized dissent, okay? German Americans were part of this country forever. In fact, we were, I think, 2 votes away from making German our official language as the United States, not English. But they were all of a sudden branded as traitors. A priest went to jail because he gave the last rites to a German who fell down in front of him on the streets and was dying, and a priest spoke German and gave him the last rites in German. That priest went to jail, okay? So they demonized dissent. Then they suppressed free speech. The propaganda campaign dovetailed with the Espionage Act of 1917, the Sedition Act of 1918. If you criticized the draft, if you questioned the war, you could be fined, you would be ostracized, and you could go to jail. This is Woodrow Wilson, gang. Does any of it sound familiar? Now, here's what the aftermath was after the war. When the war ended, the mask came off. Millions were dead, and Americans felt absolutely duped. They felt that they were tricked into going to a war that they were manipulated into. They didn't even understand it. And that's why we were such isolationists in 1920s and the 1930s, because our own government had manipulated the population to go in to fight this war. And they felt so manipulated and so betrayed by their own government, they were like, I don't want anything to do with foreign wars, okay? So, why did this happen in 1948? Well, because in 1948, all of this stuff is happening, and we're saying, okay, we need to have some sort of boundary because we're going to start all of this propaganda for the United States, and it cannot ever be turned on the people of the United States. Okay. So then why was it repealed? It was repealed without any really kind of conversation because it was slipped in, called the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act. It was slipped into a defense authorization bill. Just like it's happening right now, the government didn't pay its bills. They couldn't come up with a way to actually fund everything. And so we've got to act as an emergency. Otherwise, all of our war machine and it's all going to stop and we're all going to die and panic. The world's on fire and all of that. And so somebody has slipped the bill in and we modernized it. Why did we modernize? Well, because don't you like transparency? I mean, we're doing this overseas. We're doing all this propaganda overseas. You're the taxpayer. You're paying for it. Shouldn't you see it? There was a Congressman, Mac Thornberry. He was one of the sponsors, and he said, quote, "Today the law prevents the American people from seeing or hearing the same things we broadcast overseas, and that doesn't make any sense. We paid for it." Okay. Then they switched that from transparency to, and it's helping fight terrorism. It'll let the Department of Defense and the State Department share counter-radicalization material both abroad and at home because we got to modernize this. The internet is everywhere, okay? So who doesn't want to fight terrorists? Who doesn't want transparency? So in 2012, the left decides we got to get rid of this propaganda thing, okay? Once the firewall was gone and it was just a blip, nobody even really noticed it. Suddenly, the government agencies could circulate public diplomacy campaigns inside of the United States. And we saw this. This is where you get your USAID, the NGOs doing all the things here in the United States because they can now do it. During COVID, you saw this. You saw government-funded messaging quietly merging with the media campaigns and big tech content moderation. Narratives weren't debated. They were handed out by the government, and then they were enforced. Then take the DHS Disinformation Governance Board. This is a direct descendant from this shift. Okay, it was the government openly declaring it had a role in policing speech at home. Look at the 2016 aftermath of the elections. Reports now confirm that the U.S. government funds originally intended for overseas information campaigns had filtered into domestic projects that fact-checked, flagged, and suppressed certain narratives online. The line between foreign propaganda and domestic persuasion was completely gone. Everything they worried about in 1948 was now happening after 2012. Okay, so why am I bringing this up today? Because after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, we have been asking for this to be reinstated. This Smith-Mundt Act has to be reinstated. But after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, there is a new wave of enthusiasm for this, as there should be. But some people on our side are now demanding more than just a firewall. You go to change.org and there's petitions for a Charlie Kirk Act. And it will not only stop government propaganda, but it goes further than that. It starts to punish private media, educators, social platforms for spreading what they call false narratives. So this is our side saying, yeah, well, now we want the power to do what they did. Okay? Hear me clearly. Accountability matters. Lives are destroyed, reputations are smeared, and that matters. But we have systems in place for that. What this proposal opens is a new door, a door where government decides what is and isn't falsehood, and the government cannot do that. History teaches us once the government claims the authority to define truth, liberty is gone. Okay? Now enter Mike Lee. Mike Lee has another proposal. Mike Lee has a version that he is submitting to Congress and trying to get it passed, and every American should be for this, right or left. Every American should be for this. He's not going to reinvent the wheel. He just wants the old firewall put back, period. That's it. The government must not and cannot propagandize its own people. Restore the very bright red line that was established in 1948. It's not about silencing speech. It's about preventing the most powerful institution on earth with the endless resources of that institution, the government, and the endless reach from turning its fire hose of influence in on the American people. This is why it matters. I want you to think of football. Oh boy, dangerous. You wouldn't let the referee in a football game put on a jersey and join one of the teams, okay? But that's what the repeal did. It let the government become both the referee and the player in the arena of ideas. Mike Lee is saying, put the stripes back on their jerseys. Make sure they're in black and white stripes so we know exactly who they are. Change.org and some people on our side want to make the ref not only a player, but the judge, the jury, and the executioner. It cannot happen. I'm telling you, if this goes through, Mike Lee is proposing something that is clean, doesn't have any of this in. So support the Mike Lee Smith-Mundt Act. But if you're hearing people talk about we have to go further, that is the Patriot Act of our day. We are standing at a fork in the road. Reinstating the Smith-Mundt protections, they're not going to solve all the problems of misinformation, but it reestablishes the ground rules, and it tells Washington, you cannot propagandize us, period. Once truth belongs to the state, truth itself ceases to exist. Support Mike Lee's bill. Restore the Smith-Mundt Act.